Hello, YouTube. Welcome to the channel. Now, this is going to be kind of, I'm just going to call this episode 140 of the Unnecessary Nonsense podcast, which apparently has shifted into talking about AEW's latest ridiculousness. So, I talked about the All Out review last night and a variety of different things related to it, and I wasn't unaware of the media scrum at the time that I was recording it, but I wanted to take some time to think about it. I'm not going to spend too much time on the breakdown of it. Probably by the time you're hearing this, you already have at least an idea what's going on with it. But nonetheless, I'll quickly recap some of it. There's a lot going on. There's still a lot of moving parts. And I'm going to give you kind of two different angles on this. We'll play the It's All a Work card and one side of that. And then we'll also play the, Tony Khan has completely lost control of this thing possibility as well, and we'll figure it out. The truth will likely be somewhere in between, but regardless, there's a little bit to get through. So on the screen, I've got the image of CM Punk from the AEW media scrum, which in retrospect might be a bad idea going forward because clearly it creates more problems sometimes than it solves. It is an interesting angle and a different twist on what AEW does versus what WWE does, for example. But sometimes it can be problematic because you are, in effect, putting people in front of a microphone with the opportunity to technically say whatever they want, depending on their situation. So real quick, let's talk about this. So the media scrum happens. CM Punk is there answering questions, and it leads into a situation where he starts going into a variety of different topics and laying into a bunch of different people, which of course immediately stirred up a whole hornet's nest of controversy. Now remember, when I did the recap and review, the end result of the pay-per-view was you did a whole angle that lasted the whole pay-per-view, where at the beginning of it, during the Casino Battle Royale, you had a mysterious masked Joker who, with the help of Stokely Hathaway and a crew, of his band of merry men, he was able to basically secure the casino chip, securing a title shot. By the end of the pay-per-view, the masked man was revealed to be MJF, who confronted CM Punk, and they did a bit of a stare down to end the show. So right there, we've got some stuff leading into Wednesday and weeks that will follow here, figuring out when that potential title shot is going to happen. Now, going into the media scrum, you've got CM Punk coming off of all of that, and it's one of those situations where CM Punk being who he is, there's a lot of stuff that can be played in character. And then there's Tony Khan potentially, trying to maybe mastermind a whole big elaborate storyline here, but given the amount of stuff that I'm going to go through quickly here, it is a very dangerous game you're going to play too, and I'll even do a little historical reference for you guys. I am a history major previously in my past life, so it's kind of fun for me to bring it, and I actually think the analogy fits very well into this one, regardless of which side of the aisle you're on this one. So real quick, Punk ran down his history with Colt Cabana, which already is not a good place to start, given that Colt Cabana is not involved in any kind of a storyline. So again, we're left with the idea of like, okay, so are you going into business with yourself right now? Are you just saying stuff right now? Or is this a situation where, like, I don't know, it plays into a big elaborate storyline, which I'll cover both possibilities here in a second. And then also targeting Hangman Page and the EVPs, and basically said that Hangman went into business for himself when he did a promo basically saying that he'll protect, AEW from CM Punk and making some allusions to CM Punk being a problem backstage, et cetera, et cetera. And, and almost compromised a huge AEW gate. And he said the EVPs leaked info. So already that's pretty incendiary. But there was a whole rant that went as a result of this, and there's CM Punk kind of eating while, saying all these incendiary things. Like, in the back of his mind, he has to know that this is going to create a lot of very interesting points. Now, from basically what happened there is that presumably, as the rumor goes, and Fightful Select is kind of where I'm getting some of this breakdown information, so we'll see what else develops from there. They're generally pretty good on this stuff, so we'll see, again, with the whole murkiness of this entire situation. So immediately after the Scrum rant, Talon has informed Fightful that Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks were extremely pissed off, and one claimed they were threatening to walk over the comments. Again, all rumor and speculation, but that's what's been put out there with Fightful Select. And Fightful Select had heard prior that at least one of the Young Bucks had been in contact with Talon outside of AEW, indicating that many of the rumors heard about Punk and the frustration around him were true. Again, all speculation, but I'm just giving you some of these details. Some of the media believe that the Elite were scheduled for Scrum, but an adjustment was made, but that wasn't confirmed. Around then, security around the Scrum went around the Scrum area in a hurry. We hadn't heard if it was related to the situation, but all the information filtered in at the same time. Now, one more thing that was done towards the tail end of it. Tony Khan was at the media scrum during the entirety of the situation, and then a late update on that Fightful Select report was that by the time the wee hour in the morning happened, there were unconfirmed reports that CM Punk and Ace Steel and members of the Elite were involved in some form of a confrontation. We'd heard varying accounts of how involved it was. By the end of the press conference, several Talon media had learned that the incident happened. So again, still kind of a moving situation. Really, the breakdown was CM Punk went in laid into a couple of folks. Colt Cabana, I believe, from what I understand, is now working on ROH stuff, and obviously he and CM Punk were good friends, and then had a falling out during the infamous podcast with Colt Cabana. That again, CM Punk said things, it got them in trouble, and then CM Punk was kind of mad at Colt Cabana. Colt Cabana got sued. CM Punk got sued. The whole thing with WWE happened. In the end, they were able to work it out, but it certainly cost them money. And it's one of those situations where CM Punk, basically accumulated quite a large legal bill. But that's a situation where CM Punk said things that you didn't have to say. Now, to be fair, to give full credit to everybody, or distribute the responsibility a little bit, Colt Cabana, having recorded this podcast, could have listened to it and could have taken the executive decision to ask CM Punk if it made sense to air it as it was. Yes, it was incendiary. Yes, obviously it got the podcast a lot of attention at the time. I remember listening to that podcast and thinking, okay, this is kind of interesting. But the reality of it was they did leave themselves open to potential litigation, which is what happened. So when you're recording something like this, it wasn't like they did it live and then, a bunch of people heard it and you can't take it back. It was a recorded podcast. CM Punk could have vented all kinds of stuff, but if you decided, hey, it didn't make sense to air it, hey, are you sure you want me to air this? You had an opportunity to prevent that entire thing from happening. And that was what resulted in their fallout. And, there's potentially been some bad blood to this day with him and Colt Cabana, and, a lawsuit between those two, of course, as well. So, there's a lot. The point is that it wouldn't be the first time that CM Punk has talked and created problems for himself and others. So just bear that in mind. It's kind of a reoccurring pattern with CM Punk. He's a tremendous talent whose stuff I enjoy. He does like to blur that line. He is exceptional at that aspect of it. But he is also a lot of trouble. And that's going to lead into that analogy. I'm going to give you that historical analogy in a minute. So let's talk about the two scenarios. Scenario one is this is all a very elaborate work, in which case you're playing a very dangerous game. And now I'm going to incorporate that little analogy we'll talk about. But let me talk about the elaborate work thing for a second. Okay, so let's say it's an elaborate work, and a lot of people at that company are working towards actively giving you this impression that Tony Khan has no control over his own company, that he basically lets people go off. He was sitting right beside CM Punk when he said all of these things that created a whole hornet's nest. And there's Tony Khan, who owns the company, who theoretically should have control of the situation, didn't cut off the microphone, didn't exercise going, hey, can we talk about this later? Hey, could we move on to a different question? Again, he's sitting right there. He has the capability, trust me. For better or worse, I don't like Vince McMahon, and I don't like the way he ran his company for a very long time. But the reality of it is, if something's going wrong and Vince McMahon doesn't like it, he kills it right on the spot. He doesn't even wait. It's like, nope, we're done. You're out of here. We're bringing somebody else in to talk to you guys. Regardless, he just wouldn't tolerate it. So again, if we're going with the elaborate work category, the elaborate work is that Tony Khan has basically decided to portray the role of a weenie who can't control his own company. That's the elaborate work version of this. CM Punk was allowed to just go off and talk and run down people at the company. If this is an elaborate work, then I guess theoretically Colt Cabana could come back and try to exert some kind of revenge along with potentially other people who would be disgruntled by CM Punk's comments. If that's a situation where there's your elaborate work. Now, like I said a moment ago, this would be a very dangerous game. This is scenario one. It's an elaborate work and a lot of people are in on, and a lot of people are putting a lot of effort into. But as I said, it's a very dangerous game because you're playing a game with public perception. You're playing a game potentially with your own roster, because I don't think everybody would be in on this. It's a lot, because eventually it would leak somewhere that it's not real. But it's one of those things where then you're also working your roster, which again is a very dangerous game. So if you go with the it's a work scenario, you're playing a game where you think you have control of a situation, but you could very quickly lose control of a situation. And here's your historical corollary of something like that. And this is probably one that you wouldn't come up with anywhere else here. So I don't know if you're very familiar with it. There's a little thing called the Demon Core. And this is a bit of infamy in the 1940s, around the time that they were experimenting with various aspects of nuclear power and nuclear energy and all these things. And this was an item that was a result of an experiment that ended up killing two different people. And they ran various experiments on criticality of trying to set up these reactions, these effectively nuclear reactions. Like I said, I won't go into too much detail, but you're more than welcome to read into this. It's kind of an interesting story. The second one is the story, though, that I want to really give you. It was the story of Dr. Louis Slotin, who basically died of acute radiation poisoning as a result of an experiment. And I'll give you the really high levels aspect of it. Like I said, there's plenty of YouTube videos and in history on this, but it's a very interesting story. But regardless, this was Dr. Slotin, was a very smart, was a brilliant scientist, but who was helpful in building a lot of the tests that resulted in the nuclear bomb. Now, You can argue whether that's a good thing in the long run for humanity today, but a different conversation. The point is, he was doing several supercriticality experiments involving this demon core, and it became kind of a nickname about it. And obviously, it wasn't a great thing for these folks. So there were two incidents, but let me focus on the second incident. The second incident is the key one. So right here in this image here, this is a recreation of a 1946 experiment that Slaughton did. So what they were doing is, like I said, I'm going to be really high level because I'm not a nuclear scientist. So basically high level, you had these two pieces of metal here that can create a reaction. And with the core inside of it, if the two pieces of metal touched, they would initiate a reaction. And the point of this experiment was to see how close you could get to initiating a reaction without initiating it. And if you look at this image here that they're showing, the key to this experiment was that you had your hand on one side of, again, think about this. This is an item that can initiate a nuclear criticality reaction. And at the same time, there's a core inside of it. And basically, if these two things touch, you start initiating, you're going to emit radiation and potentially, you're almost effectively creating a bomb. And what happens is the only thing preventing you, you're standing there basically unprotected. And the only thing protecting you from this criticality is the separation between these two pieces of metal, these two halves of this thing over the core. And the only thing you've got between you and that is a screwdriver. That is a fact. That is literally what he was doing as an experiment. And he had done this experiment a multitude of times. But the point is that this is a situation where Dr. Slaughton had control of the situation until he lost control of the situation. And what happened was, presumably, basically, it slipped, the two halves touched, it closed, and what happened is he had almost no time to react. He basically had to immediately get the top off of it in order to stop this reaction. But in that fraction of a second, radiation gets emitted. And what happened was he was able to knock it away, but at that moment, Dr. Slaughton's life was already over. He was a dead man walking because all it took was one slip up. He had control of it until suddenly he didn't have control of it. So hopefully you understand kind of my point with this. This was a situation where he had control technically over all these elements. But the second he made one tiny, tiny, tiny mistake, the game was over. And I believe within about 9 days, he died horribly of radiation poisoning. Not a great way to go. And again, brilliant scientist. He thought he had control of the situation, but he was flippant. He didn't really consider how dangerous, like, in the one hand, he knew how dangerous the game he was playing was. On the other hand, he had so much confidence in his ability that he could control it that he just didn't think that, hey, oh, nothing could go wrong. Well, obviously something went wrong, and, he died as a result of it. So kind of a dark, analogy here, but, obviously in this case, no one's going to die. But at the same time, it's a situation where people sometimes get into this idea that we have more control over these things than we actually do. We think we have control, but when in reality, the elements that are surrounded by it are very volatile. In that experiment, you have these volatile elements. We're separated. They're okay. You can literally stand beside it. It's fine. But the moment these elements get put together in just the wrong way, it doesn't take very long for it to go completely wrong and haywire. And that's what happened in that experiment. And now we'll go back to AEW. Scenario 1. This is an elaborate work. Tony Khan is playing a very dangerous game. He's got combustible potentially nuclear elements, and he's holding the screwdriver thinking, oh, don't worry, guys. I've done this a bunch of times. It'll be fine. I've got complete and total control. Does he? That's the question that I would ask. This is a very combustible set of elements. Now, that's scenario 1. Scenario 1 is he's playing a dangerous game. He thinks he has more control over it than he does, and it could easily blow up in his face and not kill anybody, but he could nuke a good chunk of his company and lose a lot of what AEW had built up until this point if he's not extraordinarily careful with how he proceeds from this point. That's scenario 1. Scenario 2 is he has in fact already lost control. This wasn't a plan. This was CM Punk talking and other people talking and a bunch of people creating all these friction and issues, and Tony Khan needs to stomp it out and put a stop to it immediately. The indicator to this will really be what happens next. This obviously is going to stir up a lot of controversy. It will draw interest, I think, to the Wednesday show, because now it's going to be like, okay, so what happens now? You had that weirdness with the whole CM Punk and Moxley match, the first one, where it ended very quickly. And the question was like, oh, well, is it a punishment to Punk, or is there a situation there? And now you've got this potential storyline, this potentially great storyline, to finish with MJF, who also is in this kind of murky position, like what is his status with the company? And you've got CM Punk, who's doing all this stuff at the same time, because again, most of this rant was not directed at MJF. So that's why I'm kind of in the camp of I don't think it's a big, long, elaborate work, because the focus right now would be on MJF and not on Colt Cabana and not on the Elite, the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega, who are literally not in a program with CM Punk, and not on Hangman Page, who is literally not in a program with CM Punk. So it's one of those things where, like, if this is an elaborate work, it's your universe building over here, because you're bringing in a lot of combustible elements into a situation that is already difficult to control, and you're adding even more to it. It's a demon core thing, except you got like 5 demon cores and 5 screwdrivers and only 2 hands. Like, nothing good could come of that if that's your plan. On the other hand, if you really don't have control of the situation, then you're going to have to figure out a way to find control, because I don't know how you're going to be able to contain those many different people, those many different egos simultaneously when, they're all mouthing off at each other. It might be a situation where maybe the media scrum becomes a thing of the past. Or maybe it becomes Tony Khan directly talking to the media and nobody else really getting a say without being totally vetted. I'm just throwing it out there as a possibility because it's very difficult to say. Again, we're in this murky area. Professional wrestling is fun when it's a little bit murky, and I'm not going to lie, I'm kind of intrigued, I'm entertained from that perspective of it. But I do like AEW, and I do wish them the best. And it's one of those things. I don't want the review last night and then what I'm saying today to suggest that I'm rooting for anything less than AEW's success, because I think in the long run it's better if AEW is there as an alternative to what WWE is doing. As a fan, I'm not interested in what WWE is doing anymore. I don't enjoy what the company has done, and I don't want to support anything they do. I like what AEW does, but they're not perfect. They certainly have their warts, and a lot of them have been exposed. And it's one of those things where there is still time to turn it around. There is still opportunities to make something out of this, something productive out of it. But it is going to require, if it is an elaborate work, it is a very dangerous game that Tony Khan is playing, as I've alluded to. And if it's not, it's a situation where Tony Khan really needs to take a look in the mirror and realize that he needs to be in charge. He's got to stop being a fan for that kind of thing. Just because he's a fan of these people doesn't mean he lets them run around and do whatever they want. He is still the employer. He has to put his foot down and pick a spot. You can't be having talent meetings on a regular basis to remind people not to go into business for themselves and, hey, you should keep some of this stuff internal, and leaks are going to get out. It's professional wrestling. People talk. These are independent contractors, however you want to slice this. They are independent contractors who have egos, who have desires. They're artistes who have this, creative, opinion of themselves. And if you don't give it, then they'll be perpetually unhappy. Someone in that company will always be perpetually unhappy. Somebody in WWE, even with Triple H's, improvements and everything, somebody there is unhappy right now. I guarantee it. And it doesn't matter what you do. You will never get everybody to be happy at the same time. However, the goal is to mitigate and, ride the waves as much as you can and put yourself in a position where as many people are rowing in the same direction as possible. And that is generally what will get you where you want to go. So the two scenarios are going to play out. The truth may lie somewhere in the middle, but I really do feel like we're almost at the point where we're almost forced into one of these two camps. Either you genuinely believe this is a big elaborate story, like a crazy elaborate story with a lot of moving parts. Good luck playing around with that demon core, Tony. Have fun with that. Make sure you don't slip up with a screwdriver. Or alternatively, on the other side of it, he has already lost control. Right now, the room is being irradiated, and he's going to have to figure out a way to get people out of the room, because it might be too late for him. Extending the analogy. But the reality of it is that I do think there is still time to fix this. I don't think we're completely, done necessarily where this is going. But regardless, they're going to have to be really extremely cognizant of what the next move is, because the perception is that he has lost control, whether that is by design or whether that is unintentional. If people believe you've lost control, they will lose confidence in your ability going forward, and it will affect you. So you might get that temporary spike in attention, and you're getting it right now. People are talking about it. Not all publicity is good publicity if you do not have the ability to harness it, and that's the thought I want to kind of leave this one on. So I wanted to talk about the CM Punk thing a little bit, so hopefully you kind of get what I'm saying. In the YouTube channel, if you're checking this video out, I am going to be talking about AEW a little bit here, doing videos like this, and we'll see what happens, predominantly with a still image of some kind, and then I'll talk over it. But anyway, so if you got any comments or thoughts, throw them in the comments section. I would like that. If you like the video, subscribe to the channel. I am going to try to speak on it. I'm looking forward to Dynamite even more so now that we've really had the evening to digest some of this and see what, if anything, comes out of this and some of the other moving parts that we're going to play around with. We're going to see. Did Tony Khan lose control of the screwdriver, or does he still think he has control of the situation? And that's what we're going to find out shortly, I think. Anyway, so that's it for now. Thanks very much. We'll catch you in the next one.